Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another eMarketer Tech Talk, where we host amazing guests from all areas of media, ad tech, and MarTech. I'm Jeremy Goldman, Senior Director of Client Briefings at eMarketer, and today we will learn the data behind the streaming industry's biggest trends and opportunities, including patterns in session lengths, viewing hours, the content and ad experience, and how advertisers and publishers need to adapt. So it's going to be a lot, but in the best possible sense. I'm joined now by my special guests, Jill Goldfarb, Senior Vice President of Streaming TV at Trusted Media Brands. Hey, Jill.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah, looking forward to this. And Dave Vernath, General Manager of Americas at Wurl. Hey, Dave.
Hey, Jeremy, and hey, everybody out there listening/watching.
Jill, Dave, and I have a great conversation planned for you today. They'll share some data with you all, and I'll follow up with some questions on my end. And afterwards, we will open it up for questions about what you've learned. So just use the chat window to submit questions for the Q&A and to communicate with your peers at any time throughout the session. So with that, Dave, let's get started.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Jeremy, and welcome everybody. So if you don't know, Wurl publishes something called the CTV Trends Report on a quarterly basis, which looks at sort of historic metrics across session lengths, hours of viewing, ad fill rates, that kind of thing. So we're going to look at some of those today and have a conversation. We can go to the first slide. So what we're looking at here, guys, is session lengths on connected TV streaming. And I just want to describe the methodology of the data so you understand what you're looking at. So what we do is we take the most recent quarter, in this case, fourth quarter of 2025, and that becomes our baseline metric for whatever data set we're looking at. In this case, it's session length. So you see that one over there on the bar at Q4, that becomes our norm. And then everything else you see on the slide is indexed against fourth quarter's session length number. So you can kind of see the COVID bump back in 2022. And sort of the headline here is that session lengths have kind of plateaued over the last year and change. And so it's kind of interesting factor. We're not seeing growth in the session lengths. This is the average session length for a viewer who's watching streaming TV. They've kind of flatlined a little bit. So good topic for discussion, Jeremy.
Yeah, definitely. I think that so many different places that we can start here, but probably one of the main things I want to ask you is the streamers and publishers, how can they improve content strategies to increase session lengths and retain audiences for longer viewing periods?
Yeah, well, I think that the dynamic of session lengths is multifaceted, and there are lots of things that go into it. One thing that we do know is that the content on these platforms has continued to get better and better. So it's definitely not an issue of what there is to watch is not good. In fact, I would say it's getting better every quarter. But there are things around ad load and ad fill, which we'll talk about later. When you watch fast channels or, and you watch a commercial break, unlike regular TV, if there aren't enough ads to fill the 2 or 3 minutes, you will see what we call an ad slate, which is a "we'll be right back" message hanging out for 30 seconds, a minute. I think that's definitely a bit of a downer for the viewer and can send them packing a little bit. But the other angle that I think a lot of people on both the publisher and the streamer side are thinking a lot about is sort of content discovery. How can I help users find relevant content that they want to watch? My content if I'm a publisher, other content on my platform if I'm an OEM or an app. And there, I think there's really a lot of room for innovation. The fast channel ecosystem that has done a great job of growing. Look at that graph from 2020 has kind of drafted off in a lot of ways the familiarity of this linear experience and EPG. I'm scrolling through, I drop in, and that's great. But with 300, 350 channels, you sort of maybe hit a wall. And how do you help that viewer find something maybe buried in the lineup or something they didn't know or something new? And so I think there's lots of ways to attack that that could help people find more content. And then thus, I think it would increase their session time.
Well, and that's why I'm glad that we have Jill, because one of the things I want to ask you, Jill, is how is TMB thinking about viewer engagement and content discoverability? What's your journey been like towards, thinking about and investing in fast, like Dave just mentioned?
Yeah, so lots there to unpack. Couple macro notes on this, and then I'll try and get back to all your questions. So the first off, I think, these are actually great numbers. If you start to compare fast versus traditional broadcast and cable, which you might not know that about Dave, but he comes from, he was a cable programmer extraordinaire. These are great engagement times, certainly. And you do see a slowdown. I think as we've come out of that pandemic wave and people are getting their lives back to normal, you might see a little bit of slowdown. We're lucky. I actually had my team pull some engagement metrics. We're still seeing increase in engagement, at least somewhere between 20 and 29% across all of our channels. And for those of you, I think everybody's aware, we run 5 channels right now: Fail Army, Pet Collective, People Are Awesome, Weather Spy, and our newest is At Home with Family Handyman. So we've been lucky that way. And I think as you ask about, discovery and content, we've got a couple, I don't know, points of differentiation that I think really help us. As you mentioned, Trusted Media Brands is a great collection of brands. We have great distribution across multiple platforms. So FAST is an area that we've been in since the beginning, back to pre-2017. We were one of the early adapters with Pet Collective and Fail Army. It's always been an important part to us. But with our brands in general, we want to meet our viewers and readers and users, wherever they are. So whether it's print from Reader's Digest, Taste of Home, Family Handyman, all these brands live on print, streaming, social, digital. So we've got a great ecosystem or platform to drive our viewers around. We also have super engaged viewers. It's not just people coming and watching our programming or reading our content. We've got a lot of submissions and conversations back and forth, which then also helps inform what we're programming to everybody. So it's a kind of a great ecosystem, and we can move everyone across our platforms. The specific to FAST, when we think about our programming strategy, we work really hard to bring exclusive and original programming to our viewers. We have an in-house production and development team that is the same team that is producing for cable and broadcast. They've got a hit show right now on A&E called Neighborhood Wars. So we are actually working day to day and producing like we would at a cable or broadcast network for our shows. And when we bring in acquired programming, we work really hard to make sure that it's exclusive and fast. It's a premiere to fast. So you're not just seeing the same programming everywhere. Did I hit all your points?
I think so, yeah. And a longtime viewer here, so I'll show my bias, I'll admit it. But it's interesting. Some of your programming, Dave, this is probably a good question for you. Some of your programming, Jill, has, I feel like, moved towards like shorter content formats because Dave, there are shorter session lengths, obviously, as you're pointing out, and has that impacted content formats and people's overall content strategies? Are we seeing a shift towards more short form content on the big screen? And is YouTube viewing, I guess, part of that? Because I think some people have just been trained for years to be finding like shorter clips and bouncing around.
Yeah, I mean, a couple comments there. I mean, one, I think is that what distinguishes, Jill's portfolio is that they are quite original and fresh versus say, a 20, 30-year-old sitcom or game show that's running as a single IP channel. So that may be one reason why they're bucking the trend a little bit, because their content's a little fresher and original. And they are kind of the OG short form company in many ways with Fail Army and bringing clips and making it work in a longer format for TV. But I think the question in terms of, the growth of short form on TV, the way I've been thinking about it a lot recently is not so much the growth in what we see represented here, but more when we all look at the Nielsen gauge and recognize that YouTube, is the #1 platform on streaming TV, more than Netflix. And what does that mean for all of us in terms of how, we might want to respond and create maybe more short form experiences inside of these apps and OSs that heretofore really haven't had much of that. We don't really get into that kind of content. So I think that's really kind of a question for the industry. How do we respond to, to the way that YouTube has succeeded in CTV? Many of us may have caught in their recent blog posting the fact that, and I'm not sure if this is global, it might just be US, but the data point was that engagement with YouTube was now on CTV greater than mobile and desktop, which I found kind of amazing. So, what does that mean?
Yeah, we covered some of that in a client note even. So yeah, it's a very interesting phenomenon. I want to let you continue, but I find all of this fascinating. So go ahead.
So here, guys, we're looking at hours of viewing or HOV, which in many ways is almost like the Nielsen ratings for FAST. Some of us talk about minutes or hours, but basically this is like the hours of viewing, daily hours of viewing that's happening on these platforms. And again, similar to the session length, sort of headline, we're seeing a bit of plateauing here. And again, just to remind you, on the far right, Q4 of 2025, that's our base of one. And then across the rest of the quarters, you can see historically a lot of growth a few years ago, but recently kind of holding steady, except for maybe the trusted media bands portfolio. But Jeremy, sort of another angle on the same basic issue for us to discuss.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Obviously, that plateau. I mean, given that, what innovations can drive new audience engagement and sustain viewership growth? Because I know nobody in charge of these channels can just say, sorry, there's a plateau that's happening industry wide, right? What
Yeah.
lessons can CTV take from social media and other digital channels to boost engagement?
Well, I think broadly speaking, it would be accurate to say that at least in the early years, despite the fact that there was growth, um, aside from sort of the traditional marketing you might get at launch, right, placement on a home screen and what have you, I think content owners are starting to realize that they might need to market their offerings a little bit more. So that's a dynamic at play, right? Because obviously back in cable and broadcast, everybody markets their channels and premieres and tries to drive audience. I think for the most part in FAST, it was a rising tide lifts all boats, get carriage and sort of be lifted by the overall viewership. So I think there's been a pivot to like what are ways that we can market these channels. Um, in addition to that, I think and YouTube is related to this. What other ways can we innovate with the experience? I mentioned that I think in earlier today. Aside from just having a giant EPG to scroll through, can we do short form content that links to things we want to watch? Are there ways for us to discover content that's more personalized in the way that like a Netflix, or Hulu, reacts to us? So I think personalization is a big thing, and then innovative ways to create content discovery. Social essentially is that, right? We discover content, influencers, things to buy, in those shorter formats. And I think there are ways that we can start to weave that into the CTV experience that would be helpful that really heretofore we haven't had.
Good use of heretofore, by the way.
I think I've said it twice, so I apologize, everyone. That's once is okay, twice is that's too
Twice is
much.
just showing off, right? No,
Yeah.
Jill, what role do strategic platform partnerships and content curation have in ensuring that content is accessible for viewers and keeps them engaged? I mean, I feel like that's something that you've leaned into a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to go back to the question around YouTube and programming. I think we think of our programming as authentic and relatable as we do our storytelling for all of our shows. And we think about each of our platforms differently. So what our teams run on YouTube or Facebook is usually one format, and then what we run on Fast are full half-hour TV shows that are designed for the linear, laid-back, viewing experience that are, again, are produced by our in-house production team that produces for TV. So I think it's about the programming and the storytelling. But to your point about partnerships and you asked about partnerships and discoverability, which I think really tie in together. We work super closely with our platform partners to make sure that, let me backtrack on that. So in terms of as we think about discoverability and marketing, we spend a lot of time on that. As I talked about, the first way is our own platforms. Again, we've got an engaged viewing ecosystem. across multiple platforms that we can drive our viewers from social or print over to FAST. So we're able to do that. We also work super closely with our platform partners on promotion and engagement. And then we've been trying new techniques. Dave's being modest, but they have a new product that we've used that's also helped us drive. It works like an agency and helps us drive engagement as well. So that's always top of mind in terms of how we're thinking about that. And then again, I think it's great content. And just for us that great content means authenticity and relatability as we do our storytelling. But I think every brand finds our channel finds what they bring.
No, that's great. And I know you have a little bit more data on ad fill rates, one of my favorite topics. So I'll let you guys continue.
All right, so this is not the Manhattan skyline. A lot of bars here, audience, apologies.
That's kind of
but a lot of data. So here we're looking at ad fill rates. So, I mentioned before about the ad slates where if we don't fill the whole pod, say 2 minutes, and there's a minute of ads, you're going to get a minute of we'll be right back. And that would be a 50% fill in that particular ad break. So that's what we're looking at here is fill rates. And again, we're not looking at actual fill rates, but think of on the far right, the fill rates from December of last year as our baseline. And then again, comparatively, you can see how every other week across the last 4 years compares. And this is a rather jarring chart, I think, for many of us because pink is losing everywhere down across the board. And a lot of speculation around, Amazon turning on supply, which is kind of what the headline implies. I think there are other headwinds in the market when it comes to how the industry has been moving money from traditional broadcasting cable to CTV. It's lagging the eyeballs. So it's not like it's commensurate with the audience. So we need the industry to respond more and invest more in CTV. So a lot of factors involved, but you certainly don't want to see this overall. You can see like in the first 3 months of the year, for example, look at that every year from 01 to 22, 21, 22, 23, grew every year, loving that. But again, the pink line kind of lagging behind across the board. So it's definitely it's an issue for the industry to tackle.
Yeah, that's a somber and something that is, I guess you could flip it around and say it's an opportunity, right? So
It's true.
maybe let's end on some future looking trends and seeing kind of where the ecosystem goes from here. I mean, Dave, what emerging technologies, AI is a major one, right? But advancements in programmatic buying, contextual targeting, what of those are the most promising for improving the ad experience on CTV?
I think at the base level, the promise of CTV is that it could behave in many ways like mobile and digital generally and desktop, right? Which is great targeting, the ability to have performance campaigns and attribution. And so we're at a very early stage there, but that's what the promise is. And so I think from an AI perspective, at least at Wurl, where we've leaned into that in one way is with contextual targeting. And we have a product called Brand Discovery. You can check it out on our website, which is basically contextual targeting around 3 core areas, but the sexiest one, the coolest one, not brand safety, not genre, but emotional contextual targeting. So we're able to analyze the ad creative and score it across emotions and then run that ad in an ad pod out of a content segment that in real time we also score and try to match those emotions together to create like positive attention, so you don't have that record scratch moment of you're coming out of a somber, dark interrogation scene in a crime drama into like a Bahamas tourism ad. So that's just like one example, and there's many companies across the space doing variations on that. I say all that to say tools like that and capabilities like that should over time help the advertising agency and the agencies and brands lean more into CTV because there'll be more efficacy and effectiveness from a targeting perspective and a performance perspective. Investing in outcomes, not just this question of brand lift and what my survey tells me, but actually getting people to take actions, download a game, go get more information on a car. All this kind of stuff is coming to CTV, buy something in the moment with their remote control of their phone those are the things I think that are really going to push the industry forward. And there's a lot of folks across the space working on it, and hope to see a lot of advancements, in the coming year.
Well, speaking of that, about the coming year, and I'll let whoever wants to jump in on this first. I mean, I'm curious what both of you see as being the most impactful, interesting thing to watch with respect to FAST evolving over the next year. Let's say we do a webinar together this time next year. What is the thing that you're going to be talking that you're going to have been most excited about the year that just passed? Jill, I don't know if you want to start with this one.
Yeah, and I'll respond to the ad fill rates too, and not to sound like a broken record. But our ad team has been tackling it a little bit differently, again, because we have so many brands and we're across so many platforms. We sell TMB as a whole. And so if you're looking for motivated moms or you're looking for Zillennials, we can do an ad buy across our platforms and channels and deliver to an advertiser, what they need. So the diversity of our portfolio helps us there. And then in terms of what we're looking for, I think Dave hit it on the head. I think it's more data, right? And I think it's starting to happen as more advertisers are coming in and more traditional advertisers are coming in and trying to understand the space. They either want the metrics that they're used to from traditional TV and cable, or what they're seeing in digital, right? And then how do we, start to bring that measurement to FAST? And I really think that people are starting to turn the corner on that and realizing how important that is. So I think a year from now, I'm hopeful we're going to see much better metrics and visibility.
Yeah, I think for me, it's there's a couple of main areas. One is just, developments in the personalization and ways in which content discovery and interacting with these platforms needs to evolve. All the platforms kind of look the same. It's just tiles and carousels. And then when you get into FAST, it's a cable-like EPG. That's kind of what we have. And, we haven't really done much innovation in the last couple of years. It's sort of a VOD experience and basically cable. So I'm hoping to see innovation on the content discovery front. Again, whether that's use of short form, greater personalization, ways to surface content that's relevant to the user. I think there's a lot of room to run there. So that's what I would hope we would be talking about, some cool new things if we did this in a year. And I think I do connect that to the question of, what does the rise of YouTube and CTV really mean? And to the extent that publishers and platform operators, respond, don't respond, partially respond, it's kind of interesting to me. And so I think I'm certainly going to be talking about that a lot.
So, Dave, Jill, thank you so much for an insightful conversation, part one, because I think the insightful conversation, part two, the Q&A, is going to be really great. And we've had a lot of great questions come in already. By all means, if you still have any burning questions, throw them in. We'll add them to the list. One that I think is interesting, Dave, is interactivity and shoppable ads in particular. That's something that I know that we're following very closely and have charted a lot of data on, in part because, of course, you have a lot of marketers that are selling things and they want that level of attribution. So what advancements in interactive or shoppable ads are you seeing in CTV that show promise?
Yeah, it's interesting. We're owned by a company called AppLovin, which is a mobile performance marketing company, and we're sort of their streaming arm. So we've been kind of actually in the early days of, it's not so much, well, I wouldn't call it shoppable, but performance advertising on CTV, truly actually using machine learning, targeting users, getting attribution because they did something, right? Downloaded a game, downloaded an app. And so we've been in this space for the last year and change. In fact, our brand discovery product came out of that because we noticed an emotional correlation between why people reacted certain ways to ads. So it's pretty cool. In terms of the shoppable thing, it's so early. There's so many companies tackling it. I was at a Paramount panel and it was the debate. What will Jeremy do? Use his phone or his remote to do a purchase or to do something on the screen? We don't yet know. But I think for us, we're working a lot with some innovative ideas around short form. And I think my thought there, is that if the user is using his remote a little more actively, if you have an experience a little more like you have on the phone, where you're swiping and scrolling and interacting with the content, that creates more of a potential, right, to have you be used to controlling your television and not going, where's my remote? I have to click on something. So I'm curious to see if some of these, what I've been talking about as personalized, interactions and short form interactions on some of these platforms could start to bring the remote more into the user's habit of control. And then that could lead to maybe some lower barriers to entry for clicking on an icon or clicking through to your Vizio wallet, your Roku account, to buy something. So I'm looking to see if that can start to get wind. But I think really no one quite knows how we're going to solve it. We just know that we're going to get there because the data is so great. It's the biggest screen in the house. The attention is really strong. So the promise is really great.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, giving people one more option about how to shop. Is Jeremy going to do A or B? Maybe he's going to do both at different times, and maybe his wife is going to do one thing and he'll do the other, but it's additive, right? And advertisers certainly do want that extra, uh, you know, uh, mechanism for people to pull the trigger, right? So I think that's a really good point. This is something I think might be good for Jill. And this is a tricky question. Somebody's asking, is there a standard of what percentage of a marketing budget should be spent on CTV? So many variables at play. I don't think anybody is expecting you to, export your spreadsheet and send it over to them. But how would you advise people thinking about that decision about what allocation should be going to CTV?
Sure. Look, that's the age-old question from broadcast to cable, now fast. It's always the question, do you spend your money on programming? Do you spend your money on marketing? And for us, we've been working through it methodically and just doing tests, right? And seeing what we find to work the best, and then going from there and building. Because I think in fast it is, I think it's been important in every TV incarnation, but I think in fast, as we've gotten so many more channels, you do need to break through the clutter. So I would recommend, pick your channel or show that you want to think about, and start with a small test and then just build on it till you hit that point where you stop seeing return.
That's great.
I think also I would add on to Dave's thing. I think as an industry, we worry that, everybody wants everybody focus on the TV, but I think it's time for us to realize that people watch TV with this in their hand or with the computer, and that it's okay to, drive to the computer to say you want more information, or on your phone or a QR code, and it doesn't mean somebody's leaving the room. Like I think that's kind of been a fear, either from platforms or advertisers. And I think we have to rethink that and understand how people really engage.
That's a really good point. I was going to say, and there's variance between how people are watching, between their mobile device and their CTV. I imagine, Dave, and maybe I'm wrong, but there might be even some variance that you might be seeing in terms of session length between different CTV devices. Like I know you can get very granular with data, but are there any other interesting observations that you can find, among CTV devices, or do they basically all perform more or less the same way from a session length standpoint?
I mean, what I often have tell people is that in many ways, people sometimes say, well, what's working on fast? And my response is always, well, what do you think works on TV? So generally speaking, the genres and the programming types that we all think of as driving a lot of viewership on cable and broadcast, reality TV hits, news when something's happening, movies, which if you get hooked, you watch for a longer session length. All of those things really hold true in fast. What has distinguished the fast environment a little bit is two things. One is sort of the single IP channels, which are kind of essentially an always-on binge experience, whether it's Baywatch, Deal or No Deal, or some other show. Yeah, you see a lot of that, and that's unique. That never existed in cable. And you know what you're going to get, and it's there, and it keeps going. So that can drive session length, and I think it does. And then with sports is the one category, what you're talking about, TV to TV, that is still lagging. We don't have the premier sports yet on fast. You have some more niche sports or some repeats and things like that. So sports it's growing, but it's the one area that really isn't anything like, regular television. But the news on fast channels is live and fantastic. and then the library of content, across various genres is solid.
How about and this is, I think, an interesting question that we've covered about quite a bit, is the fragmentation, tied to the CTV walled gardens, if you will. There's a interesting, obviously, I think everybody wants just parity and consistency with data so that they can make better decisions. But is the fragmentation tied to walled gardens an issue at all for whether or not you're talking about on the brand side or from an analytics standpoint?
Definitely. I'll let Jill go first though, because she talked about it and she's kind of the one who's got to manage brands across, a dozen platforms that all have different
Yeah.
metrics.
My data team has done a really good job of pulling in all of it and trying to I'm going to say normalize. Um, but it is a challenge. So, we get it from different sources. Everybody has their own method of calculating, what is a minute watched, whether they base it off of CDN or the TV manufacturers base it on ACR data. So you are trying to understand that and normalize it across. That's one area that I hope gets better and that we can find a unified measurement. We definitely had that in broadcast and cable, and I know people always dislike the fact that there was one source. But I don't know, some days it feels like having one source would be great. So that we can really understand, help us all program better if we could understand what's working on each of our platforms. They're all going to be a little bit different, but if we were able to compare more evenly. And I think advertisers, as I said before, would really appreciate being able to understand how, not only how it works across FAST, but how do they then compare it to their buys on, you brought up digital, right? How those compare as well.
Yeah, I think there's so many angles on this question, Jeremy. I think certainly the lack of a unified measurement metric. No one knows how they're doing relative to anyone else, right? We hear this a lot. Jill's team is crunching the numbers and normalizing hours or minutes of viewing across Pluto and Roku and Samsung and LG, but they have no idea if they're, in the middle of the pack, at the top, at the bottom. So that's a real challenge, and so everyone wants to have a better sense of how they're doing. So we don't have that, which has all kinds of impacts, right? Whether you're trying to pitch your content to advertisers or talk or manage your boss's expectations of performance when you don't really know. So that's an issue. And I think with the data side, I would say, uh, the legacy of the digital platforms of the past, or the past, the wrong term, in Netflix, right, where we don't know view and we don't know stats, and it's a black box. There's a little bit of that that's flowed over into CTV, and so I think the content owners, deserve more data. They should have more data. They get good data from some guys. They get medium data from others. And there's a sort of a control issue there, which I think is a challenge. And then lastly, this is just broadly, we talk a lot about the things that are like cable TV, but one thing that is definitely not like cable TV is that there isn't a sort of a unified programming approach across all the platforms, right? Whereas if you think about basic cable, if I move from Pittsburgh to Arizona, Comedy Central, Nickelodeon, A&E, AMC, these basic cable channels, ESPN. I can change from Cox to TCI to Spectrum to whoever. And I'm gonna get these basic brands. Now Jill's brand, she's got some brands that actually are digitally native, and she's got good distribution. So you're gonna find Fail Army on a lot of these platforms. But I don't think anyone's really thinking about trying to foster that. They're trying to think about how to differentiate their platform, make it different from the other platforms in ways that, Comcast and Cox were not thinking about how to differentiate. In fact, they wanted it to be, kind of have those national brands everybody knew. So that dynamic we don't have in FAST. And I think that's sort of that's something I definitely think about as a comparative difference.
Yeah, that's I think a really good point. There's another question that I think is probably on a number of different people's minds. If you could expand more on the headwinds impacting ad fill rates beyond supply, right? Because obviously we covered supply in great detail. I know there are a number of different reports that we're seeing about economic concerns for advertisers tied to tariffs and whatnot. So, are there other things that could impact that number? And then also as a follow-up question, what role is the huge growth in number of fast channels offered playing in the 2025, 2024 declines?
That's a good. Let's start with the first question. Um, yeah, I don't know the answer to that, whether or not, the addition of more channels is sapping, HOV and session length. You wouldn't think it would hurt HOV, right? It might hurt session length maybe, but yeah, I don't know about that one, Jeremy. In terms of number of channels, there are a lot of them, but sometimes I see numbers that seem a little high to me, to be honest with you. I'm not sure if they're counting every fail army on 8 platforms. There's certainly a couple hundred that seem to matter in our across most of the platforms. But on your question about other things in the fill rate, macroeconomic issues are always a problem, right? For marketing, it's one of the first budgets to get trimmed in tight times. Uh, so that would affect all advertising, us as well as traditional broadcasting cable. I think it's more about just that the buying process is complicated. It's not as simple, right? You need to buy from multiple shops. You've got DSPs, all these SSPs. The programmatic ecosystem is very complicated. Jill or I could pick up the phone and call a friend at a cable network, and they could tell us exactly what commercials are going to be in the next ad break on any cable channel. Where here we have these live auctions in real time with very complicated structures, and then for the buyers, it's not as simple and straightforward. So it just needs to be, to put it bluntly, it just needs to be easier to buy on CTV, easier to understand, easy to execute, easier to get, data that is, uniform. So I think to me that's the biggest challenge.
Yeah. Phil, anything there?
Yeah, to the first one, I actually think the more channels, the merrier. I mean, if you looked at something like Spotify, I think what we've seen is a increased adoption of people finding, fast. Who knew what fast was, 2, 3, 4 years ago, right? People are actually finding it, and we know that people can do surveys now and say fast, and people know what you're talking about. So I think that's the rising tide lifts all boats that Dave mentioned earlier. But I do agree on thinking about how do we I go back to that data measurement as we think about um, how do we improve ad fill, right? And helping advertisers understand what fast is.
Yeah, that's helpful. There was an interesting question, and I think that we obviously talked about fast a good deal, but do you either of you have any thoughts on fast versus AVOD, ad supported video on demand spending and trends? I mean, I'll just throw in from some of our analysis. It's very interesting how they're converging on one another so that you have, fast-like experiences within AVOD platforms. That's a very interesting trend to follow, but I'm not sure if either of you have seen or have any thoughts on that topic.
I mean, I'll go first. You're right. The conversion, right, of Pluto, which was largely linear, but has VOD and would love to grow their VOD viewership, and then a Tubi, which was, I could have said heretofore again. Oh heck, I'll say it. Heretofore was a Netflix-like VOD platform primarily, but adding fast channels. So wanting to have that complement. Zumo has both. All of them have both at some level. I think where you'll see the lines blur even more is as the UXs and the content discovery things become more personalized, maybe involve clips and whatnot, then, the discovery path will tell you where you're going to go, right? You might find a piece of content that's from a live fast channel and boom, you're into a Fail Army episode. But what if it's a clip from a movie that's also available on demand and you could watch it in the moment or bookmark it for later? So I think they are converging, and they will even more as the experiences of finding something to watch become more intuitive and a little bit more multi-layered. Um,
Sounds good. Another thing that I think I had a few different questions about this, about the overall way in which we're trying to go about CTV measurement. Are we doing it the right way? Do we have the right success metrics? And one listener had a question about, do you recommend using attention data as part of your overall CTV measurement stack. Any thoughts on that?
Wonder what they mean by attention
That
data.
was my question.
Yeah, and I think that that's coming up a lot more for us, and it's measuring the level of engagement within an
Oh,
ad rather than just were they engaged, did they see the ad?
Well, we do know that the and I don't have that right in front of me, but we do know that the attention and engagement for video advertising is much higher on television than it is on other platforms, in terms of seconds of attention across the average 30-second spot. So I think that's why, whether it's shoppability, whether it's performance, there's so much potential and excitement around where we could get to because it is the biggest screen in the house. We are paying attention to it, generally speaking, even though, we have our phones and computers out. Yeah, but I don't know what they mean by attention metric, but and I have a siren going by my apartment, so pardon me.
It's New York, you're expecting it, right? Um, yeah. So, and Jill, any thoughts there before I've got one last question
yeah,
for you
look, I
both?
mean, if you go back to broadcast and cable, that whole industry moved, right, from how they measured. Back in the day, it was all Nielsen ratings, right? And then they moved from just the viewing metrics to the commercial, right? 3-day commercials and things like that. So, I think that makes a lot of sense. But again, we got to get back to, if we could get to the measurement, it would be great.
And one great question, I think, to end on, because I'm sure we have other people wondering about this. Retail media, obviously a very big topic over the last few years. A lot of really great, rich retail data that can be incorporated into a CTV campaign. So, how are you both seeing retail media beyond just the Amazons of the world? There are other players drive outcome-based buying in CTV.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question is almost the answer in the sense that it's something that we read about, we hear about it at conferences. It seems to be coming up more and more. The audience targeting capabilities, the way you can take first party and third party data and put them together. We watched that. We're all curious to see how the Walmart and Vizio, deal now that it's closed will play out and what that's going to mean as far as how they utilize that information. So it's definitely a growth area, but I don't have any specific comments except to say that it is a real opportunity. Absolutely.
Agreed. And, we're trying to get at it a little bit by selling across all of our platforms, and bringing in as much data to help our advertisers as we can. There's a couple companies out there that have started to do studies and, it's getting better. So, but I think you're right, that targeting is super important.
Absolutely. So I really want to thank both of you again, Dave, Jill. Thanks. This was great content and answering all the questions, including the tough ones from our audience. We really appreciate it. And before we wrap up, let me just take a moment to tell you about eMarketer's media channels. Visit eMarketer.com to register for upcoming live analyst and tech talk webinars and sign up for our newsletters. And don't forget to check out our various podcasts, Behind the Numbers, Reimagining Retail, and The Banking and Payment Show. Listen everywhere you find podcasts and watch on Spotify and eMarketer's YouTube channel. Keep an eye on your email. Why, you ask? You will get the link to today's playback, which will be really informative. And of course, feel free to contact us if you have any other questions. Thank you again for all your time. And thanks again to Jill, Dave, and the teams at Wurl and our eMarketer Studio team behind the scenes for making this webinar possible. We'll see you all on the next Tech Talk.